Hey, welcome back, everybody. My name is Sophia Saeed. I'm the Executive Director of the Interfaith Center. And today is the third session of our Interfaith Explorations on Spiritual Alphabet. And today is a very special session because it is co-sponsored by Arkansas House of Prayer, which is our sister ministry. And I am going to hand off our mic today to Sister Debra, who is a Sister of Mercy and the Executive Director of Arkansas House of Prayer. Before we start, Sister Debra will be introducing the class and our speaker and the theme, and also facilitating the question and answers. My only job today is to keep everybody muted so our speakers don't have any noise distraction. But I request you all that when you're not speaking, please make sure that your mics are muted. And when we enter into discussion at 12:35 or 40, you can unmute. At the end of the class, I will introduce next week's phenomenal speaker, which I'm sure you'll all love. So here you go, Sister Debra. Take it from here.
Okay, thank you so much, Sophia. And thank you so much to the Interfaith Center for really extending this opportunity to co-sponsor this particular class on silence. And so appreciate Jay leading us in this class and providing his perspective, his wisdom on this practice of silence, the sacred silence. I'll just say a little bit about the Arkansas House of Prayer. It was founded in 2007, so it's a little over 10 years, almost 13 years. It's been a beautiful, sacred resource to the community of primarily Central Arkansas, but I think we've had visitors from all around the world, actually. It's unique in that it is dedicated to silence. It provides just a beautiful setting. We call it the Interfaith Haven, set apart in nature, dedicated to contemplative prayer, meditation, and quiet, where all are welcome. So I know there are faces on the screen today that I know have visited the Arkansas House of Prayer. So I hope if you haven't, that when you feel safe and comfortable, that you would consider coming out. At this time, we also, not only is it set in nature, we have a lovely labyrinth walking path that also, enhances the experience of just taking a real, you might say, retreat. And it's not far. You don't have to go very far. That's the beauty of where it is and how it's been. You might say the silence has been protected all these years, so that once you step onto that campus, there's a different energy there. It's an energy of peace and quiet, of beauty, and I find that it's just a sustaining energy that can heal and quiet and just provide a little bit of a respite from most of our lives that are so busy and have so much noise and so much you might say interior noise and exterior noise around us all the time. So we are taking precautions because of COVID-19, of course. We do ask folks to wear a mask when they come into the meditation room, and there is a uniqueness to it as well. If you wish, there's a pretty simple process that would allow you to apply for a little key fob that would give you 24/7 access. So that's the key. Literally the key is to have a place that is available and accessible to folks when they feel moved to come, when they need to come, and it's that available to folks. So if you have any questions about that process, you can always email me or just email us at the Arkansas House of Prayer, and we can guide you in those steps. So I think with that, I just want to, again, not take any more time so that we can enjoy Dr. McDaniel. I've come to know Jay just in really the last year or so, and but his reputation goes before him. I'll say, I know that he taught almost 40 years in the religious studies department at Hendrix College, such a reputable institution of higher learning in this state for so many years. In my past life, I was in secondary education and had the blessing of sending many, many young women to Hendrix College, you might say. And maybe the highest tribute I give to Jay today, I know he's got lots of credentials and lots of experience in interfaith dialogue and process theology and just world religions. That was the course that one of my students, when she saw this course, she emailed me on Facebook and she just went, amazing, awesome. She said, Dr. McDaniel was my favorite college teacher in world religions. So I'm going to stop with that and just turn it over to Jay. And again, thank you so much for leading us in this class on silence.
Hey, thanks, Sister Deb, and thanks to everybody for being with us, with me and with all of us. And maybe you know that over the next couple of weeks, we're going to explore something called a spiritual alphabet. A is for attention, B is for beauty, C is for compassion and connection, D is for devotion, etc. S is for silence. And at one level, you can think of silence as just one among 37 qualities of heart and mind that count for spirituality. But there are contexts in which I think silence is actually the center. And so if you imagine a circle with all of those letters in the alphabet as parts of the circle, sometimes I would put silence right there in the middle as leading to attention, leading to connection, leading to meaning making, leading to playfulness, leading to nurturing, leading to zest for life. At some level, it actually begins with silence. And so, then the question becomes, well, what is silence, by the way? And I'm going to tell you about my journey into silence, because one thing we want to do is hear people's stories. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think silence is for everybody. And then I want to say a word about silence and society. And finally, I'll say a little bit more about silence in the spiritual alphabet. But I'll start with my own journey. I started thinking, how did I come to appreciate silence? And what did it mean? And for me, there were 3 experiences that were really, really important. And one of them was at a very early age when I learned to swim. And I learned to swim in a beautiful river in the hill country of Texas. And it was called the Guadalupe River, named after Our Lady of the Guadalupe. And that's the river in the background that you see right now. That's an image of the Guadalupe River in the hill country of Texas. And that's where I learned to swim. And when I learned to swim, I loved the water, and I actually learned to swim underwater. And sometimes with goggles and sometimes without goggles. I would go with my family, and my parents would be up on the bank having a picnic, and they would have friends, and there was that day world up there. But when you swim underwater, you become aware of something deeper. You're underneath the water. And you can look up, and I could look up and see my parents. But I could also look around me and realize that there were fish and all kinds of things. And I was in a different world. And it was very quiet and very mysterious. A little scary and very beautiful. And that gave me a taste of one part of what I'd call silence. It's an awareness of a depth dimension in life. That there is something deeper than simply the surface dimension. And I'm forever grateful to that river for teaching me that. And I consider that river, the Guadalupe River, one of my mentors. a spiritual teacher. And she taught me the arts of silence. The second thing that I learned, the second way that I grew interested in silence was through a Zen Buddhist priest. So when I went to seminary, I was preparing for the Methodist ministry. I was also taking courses in Buddhism. And one time my teacher called me up and she said, Jay, a Zen Buddhist master is going to come here from Japan, and I would like for you to be his English teacher. And he's going to be here for 1 year. And he's had the enlightenment experience, but his master has sent him to America because his master says enlightenment doesn't count for anything unless you can live it in your everyday life, in any circumstance. And if you're from Japan, there's no more challenging circumstance than America. So I was to be his teacher, his life teacher, as well as his English teacher. And when I met him, from the very first day that I met him, I knew that he had something in his heart that I didn't have. Sometime I'll show you a picture of him. I won't today. One of my colleagues is with us, Stella Chapek. You remember Kato Fukushima when he would come to Hendrix College. Later, he began to visit Hendrix year after year. But there was a quality to him. He could pay attention. He could really be present. He could be in the now, and he was you didn't distract him. So if you were in his presence and he was with you, he was there with you in an undistracted way. But he was also very free, very spontaneous. He loved to laugh. He was a good laugher. He had a great sense of humor. So there was a spontaneity in him, a spontaneity in the moment. He could be, you might say, obedient to the call of the moment. When you cry, it's time to cry. When you laugh, it's time to laugh. When you play, you play. When you work, you work. But it comes from a deep place that you're in touch with, and it enables you to be available to the call of the moment. I saw that in him. He also taught me to meditate, Zen Buddhist style. Half lotus position, follow your breathing, straighten your back. And I've been doing it ever since. And there was a connection between his meditation and that spontaneity of his life, because the meditation brought him in touch with something in his heart. You might call it a sanctuary of the heart, a monastery in the heart, a mosque in the heart, a place from which life can unfold. And I began to think, that place doesn't exactly have words, but it's with us all the time. So that's what silence means to me, and I'm grateful to my Zen master for teaching me that. And I'm actually very grateful to the meditation practice. Now, my third teacher was a writer that many of you may know, particularly if you come from a Christian background. You know of Thomas Merton. And when I was in college, I almost became a Christian fundamentalist. Now, not completely, but I was on my way because Christianity was kind of new to me and I thought it had all the right answers. And I clung ferociously to its teachings as I then understood them. And that's what fundamentalism is. It's clinging to teachings or practices as if they're God's. And I also, in those days, and still do, I prayed. I'm very comfortable with prayer. I love prayer. But the kind of prayer I was doing was what you would call a prayer of address. You're familiar with it. Dear God, thank you. Or dear God, please help me. Or, dear God, I'm so sorry. Or, dear God, I need guidance. In that kind of prayer, you're addressing God and you're trusting that someone is listening. And I think that is a wonderful kind of prayer, and I do it all the time. But in that time, I was looking for another kind of prayer, and Thomas Merton introduced it to me. And he wrote a little book. It was called Contemplative Prayer, little thin book. And I picked it up and I read it, and I thought, why didn't anyone ever tell me about this? There's a kind of prayer that's not addressing God. Instead, it's kind of resting in God's presence without talk, without a need for further communication. It's really not an interaction. It's simply resting in something deep and beautiful. So there's a Christian writer, he's an Orthodox priest, his name is Callistos Ware, and he compares it, he says, imagine on an autumn night, you're sitting in front of a fire, and you're sitting in a fireplace, and you're sitting with someone you love. And your arm is around that person's arm is around you, and you're looking at the fire. And there's no place to go. There's no information to be imparted. There's no guidance you seek. You're where you want to be. There's no need to say anything. There's no need to theologize. You're there, and it's okay. So Thomas Merton introduced me to that kind of prayer, the prayer of deep listening, that's not about speaking to God or even listening for guidance. It's something very different. And it's been with me ever since. And I grew up a Protestant Christian, and we Protestants, we don't know that much about that kind of prayer, actually. We think prayer is all about talk. So I'm forever grateful to the Catholic tradition and other traditions that have that mode within them. So Thomas Merton, the Guadalupe River, and a Zen master. Those are my journeys into silence. I think maybe they speak a little bit to what I would call everybody's journey into silence. Not the particulars, not the Zen master, not the Guadalupe River, not the writings of Thomas Merton. But don't we all have some kind of journey where we need to break free of what I'll call the two cacophonies? Now, one cacophony is the external cacophony. And that's not always there. Sometimes we're in spaces where we're not bombarded with the external cacophony. In the house of prayer, in nature. But we do live in a world that sometimes is very, very, very noisy. And media doesn't help in a way. Do any of you ever watch television? And do any of you happen to be a little bit affixed to the news of the day? You watch television, what's happening, and you think, if I know, I'll be more satisfied, but actually it will make you more anxious. Now, I think there's healthy anxiety. I'm not opposed to knowing that. There's good anxiety. But social media, the internet, just the loudness of our society, that's what I mean by the external cacophony, when it's too overwhelming and you need a break from it. But if you seek that break, you will also discover an internal cacophony. You will discover noise inside you, noise in the head, noise in the mind. If you ever try to do Zen meditation, or contemplative prayer or anything like that, you'll quickly discover that. Oh, I thought if I just had a little external silence, I would find internal silence. Well, not really. The internal cacophony, the chattering of the mind, Buddhists compare it to a drunken monkey. So imagine a tree with drunken monkeys that go from limb to limb, chattering with one another. That's the internal cacophony. So I'm guessing that all of us need some way to manage, to deal with, to take a Sabbath from the internal cacophony. There need to be moments in our lives when we leave the drunken monkeys behind just for a moment, or at least find a place where they're somewhere else. They're in the periphery, not at the center. So those two cacophonies give rise to a need to find something inside us that's quieter and actually more creative and not so reactive. So that monastery in the heart, that sanctuary in the heart, that temple in the heart, that mosque in the heart, it's not static. It's not merely passive. It's not asleep. It's actually very awake and very free and very spontaneous. But it's hard to know that if you're overwhelmed with the cacophonies. I speak from experience. So that then gets us to the question, well, all right, yeah, that kind of speaks to me. And so it's kind of a case for silence, a case for a place of silence as part of our lives. And here I would like to speak to two kinds of silence. And I'll tell you exactly where I get this. I get this from a Catholic sister. Her name is Rosemary Doherty. And she once distinguished for me two kinds of discernment. She called it the act of discernment, where you're faced with a decision in your life and you need guidance and what am I going to do? And you listen for a feeling or something that gives you that guidance. That's an act of discernment. And then she talked about the habit of discernment. And the habit of discernment is simply going through your days, moment by moment, day by day, with a kind of sensitivity to what's called for in the situation at hand, a kind of gracefulness. Sophia, I think this is probably a dimension of adab, the life of adab, where you moment by moment, you kind of know what's needed in the situation at hand, and you do it in as graceful a way as you're able. So I would like to make a case for the act of silence and what I'll call the habit of silence. And I'd like to speak first to the habit. Silence is a dimension of everyday life, at home, in the workplace. And what is it? What does it involve? And one thing it involves, to my mind, is what I'll call generous listening. And you all have the experience, and I do too, of being in a conversation with someone else, and it's really two monologues occurring simultaneously. And the other person is talking, and you can't wait for that other person to stop talking so you can talk about what is really important to you. And the other way around. So it's two monologues. So somebody has to bracket their concerns, their distractions, and simply say, you talk, I'll listen. And I'm not distracted. And I may not agree with what you say. I may not like you. But I'm here and I'm listening. And you matter. And it's not just about me. Now, it's easy to listen generously when you're with a friend or somebody you already care about. Some of you are grandparents. I bet you generously listen to your grandchildren. It's harder to generously listen with someone that irritates you or antagonizes you or votes for somebody other than you. But oh, how we need a society that consists of people who can generously listen. It doesn't mean that they sacrifice their principles. It doesn't mean they don't stand up for what they believe, but there's a level at which they can be present and listen. Now, the other dimension of the habit of silence, I will call generous speech. And if you ever participate in a meditation group, a day of silence, I've done that more than a few times in Buddhist settings. You sit in silence for all day. And you don't talk to one another. There's really silence. When there's a time to talk, a space has been created by the silence itself from which people can speak in sincere, soft, honest, contemplative ways. And it's a different kind of speech than chatterbox speech. It's a different kind of speech than I must fill in this gap of silence with something because I'm nervous by silence. It has a whole different quality to it. So it's speech that comes from silence. So the habit, to my mind, the habit of silence doesn't just occur at the house of prayer. The purpose of the house of prayer is to help people find the habit of silence so that they can go out into this world, our lives, with some capacity for generous listening and some capacity for generous speech and some capacity for creativity and flexibility and imagination and reverence. Maybe a sense of justice that's not simply reactionary, but true. A capacity to be honest to evil, but coming from a deep place, where the feeling is not righteous indignation, but a kind of sadness. And let's do something about this. Now that's the habit of silence. I personally think it's the most important, but then there's the practice of silence. How do you build that into your daily life? And there are many, many different ways. But I think that for my part, I try to do it every morning. And so I get up every morning and I read the Bible, and I do some Zen meditation, and I pray. But I get up real early, so nobody's up. It's still dark. And that separation from the day is very important. For you may be a night person, not a morning person, but to find some time when you're really away. It's a Sabbath from engagement. I want to say a word about, are we okay with what I'm saying? Are y'all, I'm kind of looking at you, or I'm watching I'll watch the time. Okay, we've got a little time. I wanted to mention some things that, in my experience, help people practice silence. Now, I'll start with one that I bet a lot of you know. Sound. And there are certain kinds of sounds that actually facilitate the silence. Now, one that I know pretty well is bells. And personally, I like bells that ring a long time and have a kind of deep sound to them. But I know that when I listen to the sound, I'm present. And then I keep listening until the sound is gone and the listening stays. But you're listening to everything. For some people, music helps. Certain kinds of music. I like all kinds of music. But I don't think that heavy metal is particularly helpful in contributing to the spirit I'm trying to get at. Other contexts, yes, but maybe not that context. But most of us know that certain kinds of music take us into a quieter place, and we need that. We need that. If you're Muslim, I would assume that the sounds of the Quran, the sounds of recitation, can take you to a deeper place and be a context for discovering the silence. I'd like to say a word about the body. In my experience with Zen meditation, my friend Fukushima Roshi grew very impatient with talks about meditation. He said, you need to try it. And philosophy major that I was, I said, yeah, but first give me the theory and then I'll try it. And he said, no, that's not the Zen way. Just sit down, straighten your back, relax your shoulders, fold your legs in a way that's balanced, and breathe. And so he was saying, it's hard to have a still mind if you don't have a still body. It's hard to quiet the chattering if you don't bring your body along with you. So my experience is that there are certain kinds of reading that can help facilitate silence. I know that Lectio Divina can do that, but I personally think that in the Western traditions, we have neglected the role that the body can and should play. And that can be yoga, that can be meditation, that can be liturgical movements in an Islamic context, prostrations and prayer. It's all so important. The role of the body in taking us into that place of deep listening. Now, I think that we all know the importance of the more than human world in taking us to that place. Sometimes called nature, but that draws a divide between nature and humanity, so I kind of avoid that word, strangely enough. I just like to talk about the more than human world. The animals, the plants, the hills, the rivers, the trees, the stars. They are mentors into silence. And they're mentors not only in their silences, but also in their sounds. The flow of water, the chirping of birds, the movement of the wind, the colors, the textures. They are all our teachers. And we can listen to them. So I use the word listening as a metaphor for feeling the presence of something in a grateful way, in a way that includes awe, wonder, reverence, appreciation. Now, can external silence help with internal silence? I think the answer is yes. So there's a time when it's best not to talk, and certainly to turn off whatever electronically happens to be going on, a Sabbath from electricity, a Sabbath from the internet. And so I think part of the wisdom of the House of Prayer, as I understand it, the Arkansas House of Prayer, is it wants to create at least one context in which when you go, you don't talk. When you enter that space, it's time to leave the talk behind and let silence be your teacher. External silence. But I think it also needs to be noted that what I'm calling silence, the spirit of alert, of listening, can also be had amid sound. I see a friend of mine, Michaeline Miller, who I know is an Episcopal priest. I think the liturgy can be a context for silence. And part of the wisdom of the liturgy is it can create, it's a kind of choreography, a kind of dance that can invite people into silence at its best. At its best. I'd like to say a word now about communal silence. Personally, I love to get up early in the morning and I'm all by myself and I go to this room and I pray and do the Zen meditation. I like that. But I do know that I need community. And I know that when I sit in silence with other people for a sustained period of time, it really helps. There's a richness to it, a thickness to it, of silence in community that is not always found in silence and isolation. When I go to a mosque, Sophia, and I see people pray together with their bodies, I hear silence. There's external silence, but it's beautiful. I know that there are sounds too, but I hear silence, which reminds me that spaces can be conducive to silence. The very space of a mosque, with its flat area, with its rugs, can invite a kind of silence, and so can other forms of architecture. Go to a Zen temple. It's an invitation to this quality of heart and mind. So the practice of silence, there are many, many ways to do that, and they're all good ways. I want to say a word about silence and society. One of the liabilities for people that get interested in spirituality, guilty, is that we think of it in excessively individualistic terms. It's me and my spirituality. It's I want to be whole. It's that I'm on a personal journey. It's that I want to find the solitude of my heart. Now, there's a place for that. We sure can't avoid that. But in American society, we're obsessively individualistic. And sometimes we see almost everything in those hyper-personalized terms. It's all about me. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. So, does silence have any place to play in the wider world, in community, in Little Rock, Arkansas? Kitty, where are you in Arizona? Where are you?
Eloy, Arizona.
Yeah, in Eloy, Arizona. I do think silence has profound and very important implications for social well-being. And let me be very specific about what I mean by social well-being. I mean communities that are creative and compassionate and participatory, where all voices are heard and count, and inclusive and diverse and humane to animals and good for the earth, with no one left behind. With no one left behind. That's the hope. And if those of us who are interested in spirituality somehow forget that, that's not good. So we are, in my view, in service to a greater hope. So can silence help? Well, I think it can. Because I don't see much chance of even approximations of those kinds of beloved communities unless we have people who can listen and hear others in loving and generous terms, and who can speak in loving and generous terms. So I'm not for the silencing of voices, but I'm for all of us discovering the wisdom of silence to help us live in community with one another. It has profound implications for the hopes of the world. So on then to the spiritual alphabet, which is what we'll be talking about. And this is the last thing I'll talk about right now, and we'll give and take of discussion. You know, in our series, we're going to talk about, listen to these words: attention, beauty, devotion, forgiveness, compassion, justice, playfulness, zest for life, wonder, shadow, which is owning the dark side of our individual and collective lives, the sides we otherwise would hide from. We're going to talk about all of that. On the one hand, I think silence opens up into all of them, that it becomes the ground from which we can be better wanderers, be more playful, be kinder, be more honest. So I do see silence as kind of flowering out into the rest of the alphabet, the spiritual alphabet we'll be dealing with. It also occurs to me, however, that the other ones can lead to silence. Think of wonder. How many of you have been starstruck or just awed by something gorgeous, by beauty? And you may have been in your chattering mind, I may have been in my chattering mind, but then all of a sudden you hear some music, or you see a waterfall, or whatever, or you see a poignant film, a poignant film, and just for a moment, there's nothing to say. You're just so moved. So wonder leads to silence. Connection leads to silence. That includes community, that includes family. Every once in a while, you look at a member of your family. I'm looking at Sheila there, and I think you've got a grandchild, maybe? Is this right? My guess is sometimes you look at your grandchild, and it's just so beautiful. No need for further commentary. It's just so beautiful. So the other letters lead to silence, and silence to the other letters. That's really what I wanted to say there. So that's what I have to say. Thank you all so much for letting me say whatever I just said. And let's talk from here on. Comments, questions, whatever.
I learned to swim in the Guadalupe River just north of San Antonio.
Oh, really?
I'm very fond of it, yes.
Oh, where were you? Where?
It was called Pleasure Hill.
Oh.
It was a relative's home, and I couldn't tell you what road it was off of, but.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad to know that.
Yeah. Swam with the fish.
We need to start a club.
What you said.
Let's start a club.
No.
Okay, let's not start a club. Anybody else? A thought? Thank you. A thought or a comment? Anybody else? Or a question? Dan, Jennifer?
Tina? Tina.
There's just something I wanted to share. It's a simple little thing. The word silent and the word listen have the identical same letters. So that's an interesting little combination. And also in our tradition, the Baha'i faith, prayer is essentially nourishment for the soul. It's a way in which we feed the growth of our spirit, and meditation is listening for the answer. So after each prayer that we offer, there's a moment of silence to consider what the response might be. And so that silence is an integral part of our prayer, much like your morning, Jay. I wanted to say that as well. It's a requirement in our religion too, that we meditate and practice that on a regular basis.
That's great, yeah. Tina?
Yeah.
I'll let you take it, Debra.
No, go ahead.
As a retired teacher, I've never really tried this because I didn't really learn a whole lot about it until after I was retired. But one thing that educators and psychologists have discovered is that if children are in a circle of silence, maybe sitting on the floor, resting comfortably, sitting up, maybe with their palms out, and maybe some really nice, relaxing music in the background, and, hold silence and close their eyes for maybe just as few as 10 or 15 minutes, that there is a tremendous reduction in discipline problems, and that it's a really good way of conflict resolution, or actually a prevention of conflict. And I find that very interesting, and I think that's probably a really good idea.
Me too. Me too. Anybody else?
Jay, this is Annabelle Tuck.
Hey, Annabelle.
I want to say thank you very much for focusing on how our own individual spirituality can be used for the service and growth of the whole community. Because I do think I think most of the time, those of us involved in spirituality tend to be focused on ourselves internally. And in this particular environment we find ourselves in, the ability to cross and listen, truly listen to others with whom we disagree, or with whom we may have just a totally different philosophy. I mean, it's not coming at life in a different way, not saying one's right or one's wrong. And, I'm involved in some access to justice issues and reform of the criminal justice system. And this is what I really want to try to do, is have these conversations with people who are, quote, in the system now, either as defendants or people who are, so to speak, a part of the system, meaning the attorneys, the lawyers, the judges, the policemen, all that, and try to come at it. Because usually when you really listen to someone else, you're going to find a kernel in there where you both are on the same page. Because you have some values that do meet, and how to use those values and open up a line of communication.
And Annabelle, on that, the Buddhists, to my mind, have a good insight too. You'll hear this from the Dalai Lama sometimes. When you are in the presence of someone that's that's really, really angry
Yeah.
and coming from a place very different from you that you might even find repulsive.
Right.
The Buddhists say, but listen for the pain. That kind of anger, that kind of perspective, there's some kind of wound that gives rise to that.
Yeah.
And listen for the wound.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may not find a value you agree with.
No, that's
Or
true.
you may not, but you can listen for the wound. And at least you can understand that. And that creates a kind of bridge of a certain kind.
Well, it's a humane bridge, so to speak, a
Yes.
bridge of person to person with compassion. All of us have some kind of trauma, I mean, suffering. And so I'm at an age where I can't really be, let's put it this way, a doer, but I can be a beer, a bee, be and be in that circle that encourages dialogue.
Yeah. And that, by the way, is I think one of the functions of interfaith, just to put in a plug for that, is to provide spaces for listening. Spaces where people can hear one another's stories, hear one another's wounds, find shared joys. The shared joys often circulate around food.
Yeah.
And so, interfaith includes the whole thing. But to create a context for listening. Dan, yes.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on Annabelle's thought of using silence in the broader context of social development and share a story. Back in the late 60s, I was one of 2 white workers in a Black anti-poverty program in Mississippi. We were trying to provide basic education and GED training and job skills to Black cotton field workers who were being displaced by mechanization. And each of these federally funded projects required a community board that was equally representative of sort of commercial interests and people representing the target population. What was often the problem is the white folks would dominate the discussion.
Yeah.
And so some federal trainer came along with a process called the nominal group process, developed by Andre Delbecq, who was one of my sociology professors at the University of Wisconsin. And this process was very well structured, and it identified a question that everyone was to answer, but it required passing out 355 cards. And before beginning any consultation, people were required to silently generate their responses to those questions. And that silent moment gave people to be in touch, to get rid of the external chatter in the context of today's discussion, and hone in on the internal chatter and really identify what they had in mind. And then in order to cut down on the domination, everyone had a round robin opportunity to express their idea. And oftentimes the best ideas came from the folks who were part of the target population that never would have come forward if space had not been created for their voices to be heard.
Yes. And I think if we think of, I think silence includes some people learning not to talk.
Yeah.
And particularly if you're accustomed to being heard, if you're a person in power or privilege, you talk a lot. Everybody knows what you think because you tell them all the time. So I think part of the wisdom of silence, particularly for people in positions of privilege and power, is to learn to not talk. Right speech means no speech in some contexts. And also listening involves letting people talk and talk and talk and talk. It sort of involves patience. Because some people are so accustomed to not being heard, no one understanding them. They feel marginalized. They are marginalized. So silence creates space for them to talk and to find their voice. And if you're accustomed to never being heard, you've got to find your voice. You don't even, what's that like? What's that like? So deep listeners have to be in a position to say, I'm patient. I'll help hear you into speech. That's a feminist saying, by the way, to hear into speech. I didn't coin that. But I think we all know what it's like to be heard into speech. Kitty.
I want to ask Dan, what is that process called with the cards and whatnot?
Called the nominal group process, developed by Andre Delbecq.
It's almost time for us to close. We have one comment from Michaeline, but before I close with the poem, Sister Debra, are there any closing comments or remarks that you want to share?
Just again to say our deepest thanks to Jay. You mentioned many teachers, and you are really a superb teacher and of great wisdom. So we thank you so much for your thoughtful reflections and just the way that you've invited us into this silence in our own lives. And I'm sure all of us will have plenty to take away and to discern as we go forward. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you to both of you. I really hope that all of us find that deep place of sacred silence within ourselves, where we can connect with our own selves and also we connect with the divine. Before I close today's class, I want to tell you that our next week's letters are F for faith and B for being present. And we will have Marquis Hunt, who is an award-winning jazz musician, a poet, a writer, an author, a singer, a musician, but also a spiritual director who will be speaking on the topic of being present in faith. And with that said, I thank you, all of you, and I want to close with this poem from Rumi on silence, in which Rumi says, "Be silent. Only the hand of God can remove the burdens of your heart. Be silent. The one who has seen the beloved's ocean cannot be roaming around a stream. Be silent. Since the silent one will make everyone taste, and taste this wine. Be silent. I took a vow of silence, and my tongue is tied. Yet still, I am the speaker without a speech tonight. Be silent. Goodbye, and God bless you all.